Hey everyone, this is Josh Zeman with Sinister, and tonight we're going to go back to where it all began. Not to Gilgo Beach, but to Massapequa Park. Because today my guest is John Parisi, who grew up just a few houses away from Rex Heuermann, and he watched Rex grow from this big, awkward kid into the man now alleged of being a Long Island serial killer. But John isn't just a childhood friend. He's also a counselor with a background in mental health and substance abuse. So what you're going to hear is part memory and also part profile as he digs into Rex's abusive childhood and all the red flags that were indicative of behaviors to come. Now, as John points out, none of this is an excuse for Rex's alleged crimes, but rather an attempt to understand how someone like this is formed. Because as we all know, the devil lives in the details. And as always, thanks to our fans who are continuing to make Sinister part of something truly special. It's awesome to be part of this community. And if you appreciate what we do and you like our investigative work, then please do me a favor. Take that extra step. Share our channel with someone you know, become a member, or just give Sinister a shout out on social media. Because the only way we can continue to do what we do is with your help. Thanks again for watching. We had heard that you, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you actually knew Rex Heuermann. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, I grew up in Massapequa Park. I grew up on Park Boulevard. So I was about maybe 3 or 4 blocks from Rex's house. And my high school sweetheart lived 8 houses away from him on First Avenue. So we saw them all the time. We were kids. When we were kids, we played on the same block. We went to the schoolyard. It was a very small but close knit town. Everybody knew everybody's business, so that's how it was back then. I'm talking mid '70s to late '70s to early '80s.
How old were you at the time?
I met Rex when I was in second grade, so I was like 8 years old. In fact, his younger brother, Craig, I played soccer with at the Massapequa Soccer Club. So I knew the father, the mother. I knew everybody. Like I said, it was a very small town, but close knit. Your reputation preceded you. So that's how it was. In fact, I think it was even more intense because of the lack of multimedia and the internet. People more focused on conversation. People actually talked to each other back then.
So, one of the things is, it's surprising how little there is about Rex's family out there. I mean, and that's what we're trying. Like, who was in his family? I'm not quite sure.
Okay, he had his mother, which I never really saw. Maybe out of all the years that I was around that house and him and his brother, I might have seen her 3 or 4 times. He had a brother, Craig, who was 2 years younger. 1 year younger than me and 2 years younger than Rex. In fact, his brother, Craig, killed 2 state troopers.
What?
Yeah, this was in 1989, 88, 89. I can't remember exactly, but he killed 2 state troopers in a wrong way accident on the Southern State Parkway.
How old was he?
Back then, he was maybe 21, 22.
Jeez. Was it
Yeah,
like some kind of drunk driving thing?
yeah, it was something related to that. Yeah, absolutely. So,
Oof. How did that affect the family?
it was devastating.
Hmm. And then he had, so Craig was the younger brother by 2 years, right? And then he had sisters, correct?
Yes, he had one sister.
One sister.
Yes,
I thought it was two.
that I know of. No, I only saw one. So
And she was older, right?
Correct.
Right. And so what was like the family dynamic with the mom and and the dad, of course. I mean, tell me about Rex's dad.
His dad was 6'5", 300 pounds, a very intense, um, very angry German man.
Huh. Interesting. And actually, I heard he had worked as an aerospace engineer, like for NASA, in Grumman.
Yes, that's correct. He was a very smart man.
Hmm. And weirdly enough, that's out in Manorville. It's like right next to Manorville.
What, Grumman?
Yeah, like at the time, the kind of it was like at one of the Air Force bases where they're doing some kind of research work, and so it was. We looked at the old files, and it was very close to Manorville.
Yeah. Well, like I said, his father was a very smart man, and I mean, the Germans were known for their technology. They got us on. They got us into the moon, onto the moon. The
Yeah,
Germans were responsible for that. I mean,
yeah,
collectively. I mean, if you know
yeah,
your history. But
yeah.
yeah, he was very abusive. He was very he scared the crap out of all us kids. Because when he yelled, it was like, oh my god. And I the interviews that I did, I wanted to acknowledge the fact that there was another side to the story. I'd like to say, before I forget to say, my heart goes out to all the families of these poor girls and
Mm-hmm.
Rex's family as well, because this wasn't easy for them. I mean, they turned his house upside down, inside out, and it's uninhabitable. Well, it was. I mean, they tossed the house. So, but again, they were doing their due diligence. They were looking for bodies, and I guess they might have thought that he buried some people on his property.
But I think one of the things that we're interested in, John, is kind of going into that history, not as a kind of, oh, let's get creepy about it, but really I'm interested in what forms this kind of individual. Like, how does this happen?
Okay, I will tell you. I have intermediate knowledge. I have a master's in mental health and substance abuse. So I've studied mental. I have a multidisciplinary master's. So mental health is
Mm-hmm.
the main part of that. I believe that there was a lot of red flags early on. For example, when Rex was in high school, he would leave love letters in girls' lockers. He would break into their lockers and steal their clothes. You know, that's known to be collecting trophies or stalking. By today's standards, he would be arrested. He would
Really?
have been arrested. But for like I told Caitlin, 40 years ago, stalking was, well, boys will be boys. That would never be tolerated today.
Yeah.
In today's day and age, he would definitely have been arrested. But there was a lot of red flags early on, and that was just part of it. Rex was always subliminal. He was always around, but he was always in the background. He was always there, but not there. That's creepy.
Like, like not participating in the conversation, but listening into the conversation.
No, like for example, like he was the guy that set up the orchestra. If there was a concert, he would set up the orchestra. Then he would set up the chairs. Then he would remove the chairs, and then he would set up the a cappella choir. He was always there, but never like. He was always subliminal, always in the background.
Not participatory.
Correct. Not one of the main characters, but the extra, the roadie, the roadie. to be involved, but not being a main character or in the spotlight. That's just how he was. Rex was very, very intelligent. He was extremely smart. So that was one thing I want to bring to mention. He was extremely smart. He was introverted. That's the
Mhm.
word I'm looking for. He was an introvert.
Yeah. The other thing I think that plays a role in all this is how big he was.
Oh my God, you have no idea. Let me tell you something. In elementary school, he would when he was in like fifth or sixth grade, he was like 5'8", 5'9", like, and it towered over us. I mentioned
Hmm.
in one of my interviews, a couple of my interviews, that the kids used to ambush him, and you couldn't beat him one on one. So three or four kids would jump him, and that's how that went down. But one on one, you wouldn't have a chance.
So you're saying that his size, and this is something I'm like conjecturing, but his size kind of made him a target.
Yes, yeah, in many different ways. In many different ways. Um,
Explain.
well, I mean, people are very all right for that time period. We're going back mid 70s to late 70s. Um, if you didn't have straight hair and freckles, you weren't one of. In other words, Massapequa Park was mostly Irish and German, and then there were the Italians and the Jewish population, and we were like the outcasts. Believe it or not, Italians were looked down on uh, at that time in that town. Um, and no one will ever admit that, but I'm going to tell you right now. Um, if like I'm Italian, Irish, and Puerto Rican. Okay, when I was growing up, I looked very, very Spanish. I had afro, and again, I didn't fit that criteria of straight pixie hair and freckles, and my name was O'Halloran. Okay, that I didn't fit the criteria, didn't fit the mold, but people were very um, critical, very, very critical. If you were different in any way, it was exposed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Cruel people and cruel times,
You
I'm
have
sure.
no idea. I can tell you firsthand. I was called Greasy Parisi. I was called words that I can't mention on your podcast, but I was called very, very bad names. And it's devastating for a child growing up because you wanted to
Yeah.
fit in. And when you're not inclusive but exclusive, being excluded rather, it takes its toll. It really does, and that's what happened to Rex. They were unforgiving, merciless. They picked on that kid, and then when he got to like junior high school and high school, then they started realizing, oh my God, he's gonna kill me. I'm like, they were scared. They were scared. He was almost 6'4", 280 pounds. What are you thinking?
I had heard, and it was like a very interesting kind of tidbit that you said that it wasn't necessarily the boys, but it was the girls.
16-year-old girls could be cruel. I mean, if they don't like you, but then again, he was his own worst enemy. He would ask girls out and they would laugh in his face and they would be mean to him. And, knowing what I know now and knowing what I knew then, he had issues with his mother. I believe, in my opinion, the father was very abusive and the mother didn't protect her son. So I think that was the beginning of his hatred for women. Okay, because I believe that Rex has a deep hatred for women, and he's a psychopath.
Hmm.
And I'll explain. He didn't see those girls as human beings. He saw them as objects. Okay, psychopathy. That's very, very clearly evident in psychopathy. Is when people don't look at others as human beings; they look at them as objects.
But explain that. Like I know what you mean, but like how does that manifest in somebody's behavior?
Rex is a psychopath, premeditated serial killer. Um, and that stemmed from hypersexuality. Okay, so he viewed those girls as a means to an end to fulfill his wants and needs. So he looked at them as objects. Um, it was also about power and control and dominance. That was also another piece of it. I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but um, that to me is sexual addiction that spiraled out of control and became premeditated serial murder.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. But I was just trying to say, like, did you see evidence of him being a psychopath? A kind of having an affectation or a lack of empathy when you were young.
Yes, absolutely. There's a term. It's called the shallow of affect. Um, when people when people talk about what they who they murdered and how they murdered them, it's a matter of fact. It's like they talk like that and talk about their murders like they're talking about going to the supermarket and buying eggs and milk.
Hmm.
It's matter of fact, and they call that the shallow effect. Um, but that's what I saw, and the abuses that he incurred made him. He was wet. Please follow me with this. He was weathered mentally and
Hmm.
psychologically. He was psychologically weathered, meaning after a while, um, it's like the rain beads off your body. It no longer affected him like it would affect the most of us. He got to a point of no return where, no matter what happened to him, it didn't phase him in any way, phase, shape, or form.
Hmm.
That's when you become almost conditioned to abuse.
Right. And it was it what well, it's very interesting because I think we had always thought that there was a lot of bullying going on, and it's very common. Like Joel Rifkin, another Long Island serial killer, right? Bullied. But when you said that he had been bullied by women, I think that was a kind of, in some ways, a light bulb went off.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, his hatred of women that manifested itself. That wasn't the very beginning. That was somewhere in the middle or earlier, definitely earlier on, I should say. I'm sorry. But yeah, that manifested into deep hatred, and that just made things even more. That cemented his hatred for women.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
at that age, everything that happens to you is very much what's the word I'm looking for? Um, it's very meaningful or purposeful for a 16 to 17-year-old to react to what's happening to them. It's
Hmm.
very impactful, is what I'm saying. At that
Yeah.
age, it's not like most people regulate their emotions. Okay,
Right.
situation by situation, case by case. We don't go. Most normal people don't go to 0 to 100 and have poor impulse control and fly off the handle and become violent. In some cases, become violent. It's not regulated. His
Do
emotions
you-
were not regulated.
and do you think? Well, it's interesting because you were saying that he would. kind of exhibit these behaviors, like asking girls out in a kind of weird way, like not having a filter in terms of how he was doing this, right?
Correct, correct. In my opinion, it was um okay. You're a guy, I'm a guy. Listen, we all get crushed. We like, we growing up, right? You see a girl, you like her. It's that, oh my God, should I ask her out, or am I going to crash and burn?
Mm-hmm.
And normal people would say, well, the worst you could say is no. So if you don't let her know how you feel, she'll never know.
Right.
So give it a whirl. So, and we all have been rejected, for
Right.
whatever reason. You're not smart enough, you don't have enough money, you don't have a nicer car, I don't, you don't have a beautiful house in the Hamptons, whatever the case may be, for rejection. But, to him, with that rejection was devastating, especially how it was done. See, if you ask a girl out, and she'll most of the time, if she says no, she'll say, "Oh, I'm dating somebody," or "I'm flattered, but thank you, but no, thank you." We could become friends. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough. In other words, he internalized it and personalized it and got bitter and angry over it. That's just
Mm-hmm.
my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't think
But
I am.
no, it makes sense. It makes sense when you put all these pieces together. Um, Back to the father, which I think is interesting. I don't. How did his father die?
Yeah, his father died of an alcohol related sickness, I was told.
Really?
Yes, it was a very, the wake and the funeral was only family, and it wasn't, back then it was hush hush. There wasn't much said about it. But he was only 13. Poor kid was only in seventh grade. That's tough. That's tough for anybody. Listen, I wanted to give the other side of this. If there was, I'm not justifying what he did or how he did it. Again, my heart goes out to the young girls and their families, and even Rex's family. I'm not condoning or trying to make any excuses for what he did. You know, I'm I'm a counselor. I believe in improving the human condition. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. A lot of people that I treat and have treated live with this stigma. If you're a drug addict or alcoholic, or you have some kind of mental defect or illness, you're shunned. You're not normal. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you, you look at the statistics. 1 out of 100 people have psychopathic traits or a psychopath. 1 out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
Just imagine that, being a country of 320 million people. That's a lot of folks. That's a lot of people.
You make some very good points, John, I have to say. And again, that's my theory as well, meaning it's important to know how this happens, not because we're into the whole creepiness of it, but because you have a chance to stop that. What if an adult had stepped in Rex's life, if his father had been a different person,
Yeah, well,
you
you
know?
know what? I will tell you. After his father died, he became the man of the house. Okay, and that's just a role that he embraced, I guess, out of necessity. Um, but having said that, you know, that was a different period of time. Um, people, people were into everybody else's business, but when it came to certain things, people stood down. There
Hmm.
was no big brother, or there wasn't a person that would step in like that. you got to remember that family there was trouble. That family was troubled. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody knew it. I mentioned to Caitlin when we were growing up and we played on the block in the summertime, let's say, right? We would all take turns and host. In other words, Monday will be at Keith's house, Tuesday will be at Melanie's house, Wednesday will be at Joe's house, and you would spend half the day there, or have lunch and go in the pool and all that. And he was the only kid that never hosted anything or had people over. So, at that time, people were like, wow, that's strange. That's really strange. But it was unsaid, meaning like there was nobody that was going to step in and seeing the red flags and step in and try to nix this or try to fix something. I think this became irreparable after a certain point in time. It became irreparable, and it just became worse. When they arrested Rex, I was watching Channel 12 News. I was getting ready for work, and as soon as I saw that house, it brought me back to when I was 10 years old. That house has not changed in 60 years. I swallowed, my heart went into my throat, and I was like, oh my God, I knew exactly who it was, I knew exactly the house. It just put me through major feelings. It brought me back. It brought me back to 1975. I'm old. I'm 60 years old now.
Sure.
But, it brought me back to fifth grade. You know what? Let me tell you something. And I mentioned psychopath. Psychopaths are very, very, most of the time they can blend in with their environment, and they do it well. And they're very manipulative. And when it came down to Rex, I believe, because he was taunting these families, he was calling them and saying, "Oh, if you want to see Janie again," or really being cruel. Um,
Yeah.
I like to say that the difference between people look at Rex and they say, well, some people think he's a sociopath and other people think he's a psychopath. The difference between a sociopath and a sociopath will run a red light and not care. A psychopath will run a red light and hurt somebody and laugh about it. Okay? Meaning that they enjoy exacting pain to other people. They actually enjoy it. It's a high. They get off on it. They get off on it. And that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to bring that out.
Did you ever see any evidence of that in Rex as a child?
Later on, when he got to high school, I mean, you ever hear the expression, if you kick the dog enough times, the dog doesn't get up anymore? And that's exactly what happened to him psychologically. He was done. He was toast. By the time he got to 10th, 11th grade, he any sense of normalcy was gone, was completely gone. So who knows how long this has been going on for? That this could, there's an expression: past behavior dictates future acts. Okay, so this could be going on, could have been going on for 25, 30 years.
What about, as boys hanging out, I assume you guys talked about girls. Did you guys talk about, that kids always like to share porno magazines and stuff like that? Did that ever come up?
No, I no. Like I said, he was an introvert. He really didn't speak too much. My mother used to say, "Watch out for the quiet ones," and she was absolutely right. Watch out for the quiet ones. The guy who had a big mouth and ran his mouth, you saw him coming.
Yeah.
You didn't see a guy like Rex coming. He had the perfect cover. Okay, I'm an architect. I work in Manhattan. I live in the suburbs. I'm very well to do, and this and that. And he got cocky. He got to a point where he thought, "Oh, they'll never know it. They'll never think it's me. I don't fit the,
Mhm.
I don't fit the Joe Rifkin profile. I don't fit the Jeffrey Dahmer profile.
Right.
I'm an architect. I'm a respected member of the community. I work on Eighth Avenue. You know,
Um, did you ever know him when he was working at Jones Beach? Can you give me any details about that?
that was later on in high school. Back then we all had our niches. So in other words, he had a few friends, but he didn't have many friends. I could probably count on two hands how many friends he had. Real friends fit
Hmm.
for him. So, but no, I mean we were around, but it wasn't like everybody hung out with their own niche.
Hmm.
There was no interaction with the different niches, so it was hard.
Right. So do you know anything about it? Can you tell me anything about his kind of like Jones Beach? Do you guys all go down to Jones Beach, or that was something he just did?
Well, we used to hang out at Jones Beach Field 4. That was the place to go back then. The OBI was around back then. The OBI was a great place. I miss it to this day.
Oak
But
Beach Inn.
correct. But
Do you think he ever went to the Oak Beach Inn?
absolutely, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah, I would think so. When he was older, he had a fascination with the beach. See, that's another thing that people overlook. This was carefully planned out. This was thought about. This was premeditated. I mean, the burlap sacks and the beach. Listen, at night, if you wanted to kill somebody, the beach at night would be the perfect place. Think about it. Who's around? Who's around for miles? I mean, miles. If you break down an Ocean Parkway, you're in trouble.
Let's go back to you as a kid because it's interesting only because I'm from Staten Island, but we all hung out at this place called South Beach. Like that's where all the cars went and we had the music and that's where we brought the beer because, it was like a big parking lot. So, I'm trying to find out like what his obsession with the beach was. Where did that come from? Did that come from his father? How did the beach play into this?
I can't speak to where it came from, but I know that he's very, very smart and intelligent. And having said that, I mean, if you're, like I said, I mean, at the beach at night, who's around?
Uh,
There's not a soul around.
I mean, I heard that he basic his job was to drive the vehicles along the beach to make sure that nobody was sleeping on the beach. So he went to the beach at night all the time.
Right, right. So that's the correlation. So while he was doing that, he must have been formulating a plan for future acts. Like, wow, if I want to, I don't know. I can't tell you when this started because I really don't know. Like I said, it had to be post high school. You know, when it comes to serial killers, they perfect their craft.
Right.
So in other words, even like BTK, he would
Hmm.
write notes to himself and he would say, number one, do this, number two, do that, number three, do that, number four, and chronologically plan it out. And I think that's what Rex did in his mind. He's like, wow, you know what? This is going to be the perfect place for me to carry out what I want to do.
I want to get back to one question. You said he would steal things from girls' lockers. Is that true?
Jackets, yeah, certain things. Yep, absolutely. That's what I.
Clothing?
I'm sorry.
Clothing?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist, they'll tell you that they wanted to relive the moment or take trophies. They usually do that to after they kill somebody. they take a
Well,
trophy so they could relive that.
yeah, but I'm talking about in high school. It's like kids breaking into houses and stealing girls' panties.
Correct. That's the same exact thing. Well, it's along those lines. Absolutely. You know.
Right. So he would go in and try and grab things from girls that he liked or maybe had been rejected from.
Yes, and you know what? I used to feel sorry for him to a degree because it's one thing. I mean, you ask a girl out right in front of her friends. Most of the time, if she really likes you, she'll say yes. But most of the time, they'll say no. Girls, girls that age don't like to be put on the spot.
Hmm.
So you're like embarrassing them, especially if she don't like you.
Yeah.
But like I said earlier on, timing is everything. It's one thing if you find yourself in a situation where there's that many people around, it's just you and the girl, and you say, hey Karen, how are you? What are you doing Saturday night? Would you like to go out? That kind of thing. That would have been fine, but to ask her out in front of her locker with all her friends there, like, I don't know. It's kind of gutsy, to be honest with you.
Or lack of social cues.
Correct. That could both could be true.
Yeah.
Both,
So,
both could be true.
and did you think that his father beat him up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, and back then, you got to remember now. Back then, 45, 50 years ago, you know, parents that beat their children, they didn't see any courtroom. They didn't. Nobody called CPS. My father used to say, "Here's a quarter. Call the cops."
What do you think he beat him with? What do you think he beat him with?
Who knows? Who really knows? But
A
there was
belt?
definitely
A belt?
psychological and verbal abuse, and usually violence, is connected to that.
Well, that's why I was thinking about the belt that was wrapped around one of the women. I mean, there's obviously he's very meticulous. He wouldn't have put that belt there if there wasn't some kind of reason, and the belt had the initials of the grandfather on it.
The belt was very significant, very
What?
very significant.
Why do you think?
Well, it brought him back to his younger days, and he was comfortable using it. Um, you know, but it was very significant. It was a tool that he used in committing his murders. So for him to pick that a particular tool, it's significant. It definitely is, in
I,
my opinion. In my opinion.
I'm sure you never heard anything about the grandfather, right?
No, 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 not the grandfather. But again, Rex's father, he was scary. I mean, you got to remember, when we're like 10 years old and we're like 4 feet tall, and we're looking
Mhm.
up, and the guy's like almost 2.5 feet bigger than you, and he's 300 pounds. We were scared for Rex. We were, like, oh my goodness, he's gonna get killed.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And what about the Craig's role in all this? Like, was he as kind of as insular and as maybe bullied as Rex was? Like, how was he different or the same?
No, Craig was different. Craig had a lot of friends. Craig had a girlfriend. Craig played soccer with me, the Massapequa Soccer Club. Um, we used to play at Walker Street Park, which I think it's I think it's called Mansfield Park now, or whatever. But we would play soccer. Our games would be on Sundays. We would play at different junior high schools or sometimes elementary schools. Um, but yeah, his brother was a lot different. They looked alike, but Craig was more personable. He had more of a personality. He presented much better than Rex did, and he was younger. So just imagine being 13 and losing your father. Whether abusive or not, it's still your father, the only father you're ever going to have. So to be that age and to lose him at that age, lose your father at that age, it was really tough. We felt bad. I mean, we all created Rex. that includes his family, that includes the bullying at school, that includes not being accepted or part of. We all created him.
By the way, you reminded me, was there any discussion of hunting, or like did his father go out hunting, or was that something ever discussed or seen?
I know that well, a lot of people knew he liked guns. And, back then, you know, it was like you kind of kept away from people with guns. It was a different time. I mean, early 70s to mid 70s, we're talking the Nixon years and all that. I mean, I don't know. I will tell you this: when I was that age and younger, like 73 to 75, I mean, every night we used to watch the Vietnam War on TV. Walter
Hmm.
Cronkite. We used to see American soldiers getting shot on TV, eating dinner. So it was a different time, is what I'm trying to say.
But no, but did you, like, when you were kids, like, did he, was there the knowledge that there were guns in the house?
Well, certain people knew. His very close friends, like neighbors and stuff. But again, that was taboo back then. You know,
Hmm.
police would only want to have guns or military or whatever. But it was a different time. Like I'm trying to stress, there were more. Um, there were more social norms. In other words, there are rules and laws, and then there are norms. Okay, that wasn't very normal.
Right. As somebody who's dealt with addiction, do you think there was a pornography addiction or a sex worker addiction?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned to Caitlin, it's called hypersexuality. When you're
Hmm.
addicted to sex, it's called hypersexuality. That's one of the terms. And, a lot of people have sexual addiction. Okay. But a lot, many, out of those people that have that sexual addiction, they don't go on to kill people. They might get a call girl and spend 300 or whatever amount of dollars and do their thing for an hour, and that'd be it. All right, bye. Have a nice day. Have a good week. And it would be transactional. This was not transactional. This was planned out. This was meticulously planned out and carried out.
All right. John, thank you so much. I totally appreciate it. It's been wonderful to talk to you. I appreciate all your knowledge, and I think you have a really interesting understanding of the case, and thank you for sharing that with me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Hey, everybody. So I want to thank John Parisi for his willingness and his candor, because it's not easy to sit and talk about how the guy you grew up with is now an alleged serial killer, especially when you carry your own scars from the neighborhood. Now, if you bristle when you hear the idea that we all created Rex, well, I think the more we understand that, the more we can actually find the tools to stop this from happening in the first place. Again, none of this is an excuse for what Rex is accused of, but it does remind us that men like Rex are made long before they're arrested. And as always, our focus remains on the victims and their families. Now, if this episode helped you understand the Gilgo Beach case in a deeper way, then please subscribe or leave a review or share it with somebody you know, because it really does help us to continue this work. Now, you can find bonus conversations, early releases, and behind the scenes material in our Patreon and on YouTube memberships. And all of that is linked in the show notes below. I'm Josh Zeman, and this has been Sinister. And once again, thank you for listening.